up to the carefully curated lives of pop stars and internet influencers that we follow online. This is leading to an epidemic of loneliness, anxiety, depression, and suicide. Without a moral compass, an anything goes attitude has been adopted when it comes to sexuality. Sex is meaningless, gender a personal choice, monogamy a joke. But it's not all bad. There is hope. This generation is passionate about injustice. They care about the oppressed and the marginalized. They want to use their lives to make a difference in the world. A commitment to tolerance has made them open to spiritual conversations, which can be an opportunity to share the gospel. On top of that, the internet has made it possible to reach millions of people instantly. Social media is being used to share the gospel in places previously impossible to reach. If we are going to reach the global youth culture, we have to understand the unique challenges that they are facing and how we can best respond. It starts by recognizing the large cultural gap that exists between the church and this global generation. In order for us to reach them, we need to go to their places and learn how to communicate with them in a way they will understand. Most importantly, this cannot just be a trend to study or statistics to analyze. These are our brothers, our sisters, our sons and daughters, friends and coworkers. Our heart needs to break for them. Things might seem bad, but there is hope. God is greater than the problems facing the global youth culture. And if we ask him, he will use our lives to reach them.
Steiger is experiencing explosive growth around the world. And while this is exciting, we recognize that this comes with a danger of forgetting who we are and how we got here. We have prayerfully identified 6 core values which anchor us, even as our strategies may change depending on the context that we are in. All of those who represent Steiger around the world can be identified by their commitment to these core values. They are: seek God. We believe that God rewards those who seek him with a desperate heart. We know that if God takes his hand off of us, we are dead. And without his power, our efforts to reach people will fail. It's not our plans or strategies that change the world, but the infusion of God's power into all he asks us to do. With this in mind, we push ourselves and each other to desperately seek God through diligent prayer, in-depth study of his word, and passionate worship. Preach the cross. The world is broken and people are hurt and lost. This is the consequence of our sin and rebellion. And only Jesus' death and resurrection can break the power it has over us. That's why we will always preach Christ and him crucified, believing that when we do, God unleashes his power and lives are changed. We are always asking God for relevant ways to preach the cross while acknowledging the fact that it will always be foolish and it will always be difficult. Be relevant. Jesus was relevant, and we aim to model ourselves after him. He knew people in an intimate way, and because of this was able to communicate his message powerfully. We want to do the same. We push beyond the surface to connect with people. We share our lives, and in the process, God breaks our hearts for them. Only then can we communicate the message of the cross in a language that the global youth culture will understand, while at the same time never changing, obscuring, or omitting the biblical gospel message. Relevance is never about popularity, it's about clarity, wanting nothing to obscure the gospel from being understood. Strive for holiness. God has called us to go outside the church and to share our lives with those who are far from him without conforming to the moral standards of the world. In Steiger, we value a holy and pure lifestyle out of a sincere desire to obey and serve God. We take sin seriously, embrace accountability, and hold each other to high standards. We strive for holiness in the hope that nothing in our lives will be a barrier to God using us to share his love with the global youth culture. Have courage. You can have a broken heart for the lost. Pray desperately. Have a deep understanding of the people you're trying to reach. But without courage, you will do nothing. Courage is not the absence of fear, but rather a willingness to step through fear Steiger believes that this courage comes from a deep trust in God, in his promises developed by diligently studying his word, by daily committing to seek him. Steiger seeks the courage to defy conventional thinking, ask for extraordinary things of God, speak the truth boldly, even if it's not popular, take great risks, and sacrifice safety, security, and reputation, all for the sake of the gospel. We are family. We are called to reach the global youth culture for Jesus, but we cannot do it as individuals because on our own we lack the needed gifts, insights, and abilities to see God's work accomplished through us. Together we are stronger than we will ever be apart. We are not just co-workers, we are family. This means we care for each other, have each other's backs, and stick together in good and hard times. Seek God, preach the cross, be relevant, strive for holiness, have courage. We are family. These are our values.
All right, we're back. Welcome everyone to Steiger International Apologetics for the Global Youth Culture event. My name is Aaron Pierce. I am in Minneapolis, Minnesota in the United States. I am your host for today. I am reminding myself to speak slowly because we have translation going on in many different languages. So ironically, if you can't understand me, make sure you click the interpretation button. I am the International Missions Director for Steiger International, and our heart is to reach and disciple the global youth culture. And this event is all about addressing the most relevant cultural objections facing the church today, particularly as it relates to the global youth culture. And so we are so excited to be back. Our production team told me yesterday that we have 2,222 people, so very round or two-oriented number, registered.
It's a magic
Yeah, a lot
number.
of 2,222 people registered from 70 different countries. 6 out of 7 continents are covered. So that makes me think, where are the Antarcticans? Is that how you say that?
Yeah.
But that's the only one we're
That's right.
missing. We have people
We'll
here.
get working on that.
Yes, that's right. We'll get going. There's some people there. We have people joining us here on Zoom, and if you're here, then you're going to be able to interact with questions. We on one of our language-specific YouTube links, and then the rebroadcast for people that want to hear it again, and specifically for our friends in the Asia Pacific region. So today is going to be another great session. We have an amazing guest speaker in Justin Brierley, who I will introduce soon. And at the end of the session, you will also hear from Steiger's founder, David Pierce, my dad. So don't miss that. With me, once again, I have, first of all, Luke Greenwood, Steiger's
Hello, everybody. It's Luke here. I'm speaking slow for our translators.
Slow down, they're saying. Okay, okay. So Luke is our European director. Luke and I have, he's in Poland, he's British, lived in Brazil. Luke and I have worked together for over 15 years now. I was just calculating earlier, Luke.
Since we were
Luke
little
was
children.
a wee lad. Yes.
Yes.
Yes, exactly. We first met actually while on tour with the band No Longer Music in Brazil. And it's an awesome privilege to serve together, Luke, and hopefully many more. So welcome, Luke.
Likewise. I love being part of this. It's so exciting. It's been amazing 2 days, and I'm really excited about today. I really appreciate Justin and his work, so I'm looking forward to later on.
Yes, yes. So, and also joining us is Lucas Ruger, a Swiss dude living in Beirut, Lebanon. He is he's our Middle East director, and he has pioneered the work of Steiger, reaching what we call globalized Middle East youth, and incredible things. He will be actually a speaker at the last weekend, next weekend, And he has amazing things to say, and we'll learn more about that then. But welcome, Lucas.
Thank you and welcome everyone. I'm excited as well to be here. My team here in Beirut, I think they listen to every single episode that Justin Brierley puts out on Unbelievable. We're a great fan of his work. And yeah, I'm excited to be with you guys. I enjoyed the last 2 days, John Lennox, Paul Copen yesterday. And I think it's going to be very, very relevant what we're going to hear from Justin Brierley today. So yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah,
Hey,
me too.
hey, Aaron, I don't think we've mentioned yet, but Lucas has this cool YouTube channel called
Oh, we will.
Deflate. Good,
Yep.
good.
Lucas,
We will.
yeah, and
It's a
Will,
secret for now, though.
well, when
That's
he
right.
speaks, we'll definitely reference it then. But Lucas has a YouTube channel, an apologetic YouTube channel called Deflate. I'm sure someone's putting it in the chat as we speak. So that's a great resource, and we'll definitely reference that more when Lucas is our speaker. Before we get started, I just wanted to remind everyone that the purpose of this event is to mobilize followers of Jesus to mobilize you to reach young people who would not otherwise walk into a church. Our mission, Steiger, our primary purpose is to bridge the gap between the church and the global youth culture. And the way that we do that is by establishing Steiger City teams all over the world. And these city teams are specialists at reaching the global youth culture through training and equipping the local church and engaging in creative evangelism, leading to discipleship relationships. And our heart and their desire is to see cities transformed, to see the church unified and mobilized to reach a generation that is often uninterested in coming to our church. So we've got to go to them. I just want to quickly, because there's been some questions. Well, what is it that a Steiger City team does? So we're just going to quickly run through that, and then we'll jump into our topic for the day. So what is it that a Steiger City team actually does? First of all, as you maybe heard in our values video that played right before this, but our heart is to base everything we do and in a culture of seeking God. If you go to our international center in Germany, where where the Steiger Mission School is hosted, you'll see on our wall written, God rewards those who seek him with a desperate heart. And this is from Hebrews 11:6. It's a paraphrase, and it's just the idea that we want to seek God desperately, and that nothing we do is going to matter if it doesn't come by God's power. And so we seek him desperately. The second thing that we do as a Steiger City team is we want to be relationally present in the scene. We want to go where people are and build real, deep, authentic relationships with people so that we really understand how they see the world and their fears and their hopes and their dreams, so that God gives us a broken heart for them and we can communicate with relevance. So we want to be relationally present in the scene. And then we want to use that and engage in regular creative evangelism. You know, I love the arts and creativity, and I believe this is one of the ways in which God has made us in his image. And so we use creative things, tools to spark gospel conversations that lead to discipleship relationships. And we do that in all kinds of creative ways. And then we want to host large scale catalytic evangelistic events like concerts or online initiatives that proclaim the gospel from the rooftops. Because in a world that only hears lies, we want to communicate truth loudly for people to hear. We do that in many different ways. And then we want to create discipleship relationships, foster discipleship relationships, whether it's through our Bible studies for the non-religious or our community houses. We want to foster discipleship relationship as a bridge to the local church, because there often is a gap that we need to work through. And then we train the church. We love the church. We're part of the church, and we want to see the church equipped and mobilized to reach young people outside the church. And so we do all kinds of church training And if you're a pastor or a church leader, we have resources and training for you that we want to offer. And then finally, we invest in young leaders, and we want to raise up the next generation of Christian leaders and influencers that can reach this generation. So these are the main things that we do as a mission. I'm trying to exit out of my slide, which is struggling. For some reason I can't see my. Isaac, can you unshare my screen?
What would we do without Isaac?
Oh, seriously, there we go. All right. So this is our heart. And what we want to say to you is, as you go through this time with us, if you feel called to be part of a Steiger City team somewhere around the world, then we want to encourage you to take the next step. And we're looking for people of all backgrounds and giftings and skills. Our teams are multi-gifted in that sense. And there's many ways that you can connect. For example, this week we're going to have calls in all our regions and we want you to participate in these calls and learn how you can get involved in your city. And then also, if you're in Latin America, and we got a whole bunch of Latin American fire going on, in the next month, we're going to be doing local Steiger intensive training in various cities throughout Latin America. So please check those out and join us in person. And then finally, we have the Steiger Mission School in Kyiv, Ukraine, happening in May, and our full Steiger Mission School in Germany this summer, Lord willing, based on COVID. So these are the ways that you can get involved. We would love for you to do so. But today, just want to shift now. Today, we are talking about a very relevant topic for the global youth culture. The topic of who decides what is right and wrong. And to help us address this topic, we are honored to have Justin Brierly with us today. Justin, thank you for being here. Justin is a writer, speaker based out of Surrey. I hope I'm saying that right, outside of London in the UK. He presents, did I say it right?
That's good. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Sorry. Well,
it's fine.
I'm
It's
just
all
a
good.
dumb American. He presents Premier Christian Radio's flagship apologetic and theology debate program, Unbelievable, where he brings Christians and non-Christians together for dialogue. He also hosts the Ask NT Wright Anything podcast with New Testament scholar Tom Wright. With these projects and others, he works to bring theology and apologetics into the real world, which is exactly why we want you here. So Justin, thank you so much. After all of that, thank you so much for being here with us.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure and just so grateful for the invitation. Thank you very much. It's so exciting as well to hear all that you guys are doing globally. I love the way this is an absolutely international venture, and you just want everyone to join in wherever they are. I think it's fantastic.
That's awesome. Well, so the topic that we're bringing up today, this whole idea of morality and understanding what is right and wrong, is so relevant to the global youth culture. So if you don't mind, what I want to do is show a 2-minute clip of a street interview to get us started, and then have you react, and we'll get going. Because what we find is when we talk to people on the streets about issues of morality and truth, there's a lot of confusion. And so I want to show this video and then ask that you would react to it, and to get us started on this whole topic of who decides what is right and wrong. All right, so let's do this one more time.
How do you think we all got here? How did life begin?
It started with the Big Bang. I don't really know much more than that.
So I believe in evolution and that we evolved from primates. I mean, there's proof that our DNA is 98% the same as chimpanzees. So
probably just like a meteoroid with like some microbes on it that landed on Earth from a different planet, and they're like eventually evolved to become humans.
What is the purpose of life?
Let me know when you figure it out.
Yeah. I'm still working on that one.
Make your own,
Like, I don't think there's no like grand purpose for anybody. Just like, and everyone, it's just there is no purpose. Make up your own purpose and run with it. And
help continue the evolution of human beings as a species.
So, how do you think that right and wrong are decided?
Oh, I don't know. I think it's different for like everyone, depending on like what they think is right and wrong. Because like people believe in different things, so it can't be the same for everyone.
That goes back to like your morals, I guess. It like because your right can be someone else's wrong, so it's all like based on your morality. I take it.
I think that like it depends on yourself and what you think is right and wrong and what you believe in. And as long as you stick to your beliefs and like carry out what the Bible says or what the Quran says or like whatever, then like you're living your life to the fullest and that's all that matters.
What do you think happens after we die?
I don't know. I mean, isn't that kind of the beauty of it? You know, there's a lot of people who are spiritual and have things in which they believe in, and so it's kind of a manifest of what you believe. I also feel like that is subjective because no one knows, and so I think that's kind of the beauty of it.
nothing happens, and hopefully you live your best life. And if there is an afterlife, hopefully I live within the boundaries and make it there. You know what I mean? So
I believe in heaven. I for sure believe in heaven. I don't know if I believe in hell. I think that like if you want to believe in hell, then you'll probably go to hell. Like
rather than being showered with, gold and jewels, and we're living in some place where you have to have wings and a harp. Hopefully, we just get reabsorbed into that consciousness that allows the oceans to move and the tides and the rivers and the trees to grow. And I hope. And maybe there's nothing. Either way, it doesn't matter.
So there you have it. Justin, how do you react to that? Is that surprising or is that, yeah, how do you react?
I not surprising in as much as those kinds of answers, I think, I don't know where you shot that, but here in the UK, we would get a very similar range of responses to that. It's very much we're living in a generation which is kind of, you've got your truth, I've got mine. Everyone's got to figure it out for themselves. There's no set path. We've all got to kind of make up our own purpose, our own destiny. And it's really interesting, isn't it? Because these are also the same people who might, when an issue of justice comes up, say, no, there is a definite right answer. There is a definite way we should be treating this issue. You look at, when people get out on the streets to protest racism, if you're going to ask them, oh, so that's just what you believe, I could believe something different, I doubt they're going to say, no, you believe what you want, I'll believe what I want. It's funny, we live in a culture where there is this absolute contradiction at the heart of people. On the one hand, it's everyone just has to make their own mind up, do their thing, whatever works for them. And on the other hand, we're out there protesting, saying this is the way things should be. And I find it almost amusing in some ways that people don't see that they can answer in this way on some subjects, and suddenly when they're presented with something else, it's completely the opposite. There's a definite way we should be living our life. There's something we should all agree on. So I think we live in a very confused culture right now. I think that's the answer to it. But we also live, and I loved this, in the intro video before we started the session, we live in a culture where there's an enormous opportunity, because actually young people especially, are passionate about justice. And I think it's helping them to see where that passion comes from, why we care about the way life should be lived. That's the key thing for me. Yeah,
it's interesting. So I live in Minneapolis, so we were the center of the universe for a few days back last year with the whole George Floyd thing. And I remember a few days after it happening, coming and walking around the protests that were happening, buildings still on fire, and looking at all these people who were just passionate about justice, passionate for something that is definitively right. And it was just such an interesting point, because these are the same people in this video that would say, well, morality is subjective. So it's that contradiction is so present. Why do you think they don't recognize that, or how do they live with that?
I think a lot of it is down to the fact that we live in a very postmodern culture. So that essentially means, you know, we've lost the big narratives that used to guide our life, if you like. You know, once upon a time, you know, in large part, the West was a Judeo-Christian sort of based nation. And in that sense, it had a pattern, it had a way of seeing itself. It saw itself within this big story of Christianity. As that has gone away, as secularism has come in, what's happened is that basically we've been told repeatedly by our films, by our media, by our pop songs, you do what works for you, okay? And basically it says you got to be who you're going to be. There's no set pattern. You've got to do whatever feels right for you. And essentially now everyone has to choose their own story, their own narrative. And this has led to this general idea that actually there's no overarching meaning, there's no overarching purpose, there's no right or wrong per se. It's just, you know, you have your truth, I have mine,
preference,
and we'll just jog along. And I think that's where it's coming from. I think that's why people believe that. But the problem is, I think they're only just starting to see now, especially in a social media age, that when another person has a very different idea of how life should be lived and it doesn't match up with mine, but I feel strongly that no, the way I think life should be lived, suddenly you get this butting and you basically get a culture war, which is what we're living through in a lot of our social media interactions right now. And so we're basically can't agree because we lost the narrative we all once agreed on, and everyone's kind of basically doing their own thing and able to sort of be who they want to be. But when we find that butts up against each other, we have a real tough time with it. So yeah, it's an interesting one. But I think there is this extraordinary opportunity because actually, for me, this is one of the most powerful arguments for God, because, you know, lots of arguments, and we've done a lot of them on my show. You know, we're debating, you know, science and the universe and philosophy, and we're saying, you know, doesn't this all suggest that there's a God, the sort of the order and everything in the world? But when it comes to this, when it comes to the way you feel about something, you know, the issue of racism, for instance, you know, if you say it's wrong, it's evil to discriminate against someone based on the color of their skin, you're saying something very interesting. You're saying there's something about this universe that isn't contained in the molecules or the physics of it. There's something actually embedded in reality about the way we should treat each other. Okay.
Something
and
absolute,
for me,
almost.
Yeah, there's this, you know, to use the big grand philosophical terms, there's this objective reality about nature, and that is that there's a certain way humans should treat each other. Now, where does that come from? Because that's the question I want to ask the person who believes so passionately in justice and in anti-racism or whatever. I want to say, where does that come from? Where did you get that if you don't believe in God? I think there's an extraordinary argument here. It's one of the most powerful arguments, in my opinion, for God, that the world is not just composed of atoms and electrons. There's actually this moral reality, and we're all living in it, and we all feel it at certain times. You know, if you could be a relativist who says, I think people, you know, believe what they want. They, you know, some people believe this, other people believe that. It's all up for grabs. But if someone comes up to you in the street, punches you, and takes your wallet, you're going to stop being a relativist pretty quickly at that point. You're going to see, I've just been, you know, the sense of justice rises up in us, you know. And when we see people out on the streets demonstrating, we can see that there is this sense of justice that people have. And the question is, where did that come from? Is it just an accidental byproduct of a kind of purposeless process of evolution? That doesn't make sense, because that's not the way we think about it. It's something much deeper than that. And I think that's pointing beyond us to something else. Sorry.
That's right. You know, Justin, that was one thing I was going to ask you next, was relating to what you just said, because one of the most common counter arguments to that comes up in some of your debates on the Unbelievable podcast, and also when we go to the streets doing what Aaron showed on the videos all around the world. And as you pointed out, it's the same everywhere, very similar responses. Very often, a counter argument that comes up is, well, we know what's right and wrong from experience, from time, from history. Humankind has learnt what does good for our community, what does bad. So it's an evolutionist argument, and it says we don't need a god or a religion to tell us what's morally right and wrong. We've learned by common sense, by repetition, by experience. We've learned what's right and wrong. So what have you seen as some of the best ways to respond to that?
Well, I guess one of the easiest ways to respond to that is simply to point people to the fact that evidently, despite our evolutionary history, we still live in cultures that are very different and which we disagree with the way they're living. Okay, so if basically all of our beliefs, our moral beliefs about what's right and wrong, are just a kind of happy accident of the way evolution has produced some kind of societies that sort of function better when they're agreeing on how to do things. Well, what do you say to a culture, for instance, in some parts of the world today, where female genital mutilation happens? Okay. Now, in the West, most people would say that's wrong, that's evil. You should not be doing that to young girls. Okay. But if you believe that actually, hey, we're all just kind of jogging along with whatever our evolutionary history happens to have given us, well, that's just the way things turned out in that part of the world. Okay, that's, you don't have any right to criticize them because that's just the way their culture gets on with things. Okay, but most of us realize that can't be true. It's either right or wrong. Okay, either women shouldn't be subjected to female genital mutilation, or it's okay. And so there's a problem. Just saying, oh, it's just whatever evolution handed to us doesn't make sense, because there are some things that we still believe are wrong, even though that we're at this particular point in you go back 200 years. Okay. The fact that most people in North America were fine with slavery, well, does that mean it was fine? Well, no, it doesn't. They were wrong about it. Okay. They were mistaken. So it doesn't really matter what evolution happens to have given you. The question is it right? Is it wrong? That means there's a value beyond evolution. There's something else by which we believe we're measuring this. There's an ultimate standard. And whether or not your evolutionary history happens to have delivered you the right one, well, that's the big question, isn't it? Because we obviously don't believe it always does. So for me, it's always pointing beyond ourselves. These feelings we have of justice, this idea that there are really right and wrong ways to treat people in the world, they're all saying, actually, there's a standard that exists outside of ourselves, outside of the natural order. It's already there, and we're either heading towards it or we're heading away from it. But who put it there? That's the question. And for me, that's where you have to go beyond the natural. You have to say there's a supernatural dimension to life, and it's God ultimately.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I would add to that, Justin, I like what you said. And I would add to that, and this is maybe a bit complex, but you could actually, for the sake of argument, give in and say, well, we might have learned about our objective morals through the process of evolution, but that does nothing to, do away with objective morality, because, we learned, 300 years ago, 400 years ago, we didn't know all the objective facts about the universe that we know now. And yet that doesn't know that those objective facts were real and that there was an objective reality about the physical universe. So in this sense, the way we come to know about something has nothing to do with the objective reality of the thing itself. You can learn about the law of gravity through a fortune cookie or by reading a textbook from university. It just doesn't matter how you learn about it. The law of gravity is objectively true, whether no matter how you learn about it. Yeah.
Yeah. And what's interesting for me in all of this is that I think people have forgotten actually where this sense of the rightness and wrongness of things kind of has come from, in a sense, because it's not as though there's a sense in which partly it seems to be somehow inbuilt in us. We get this sense of fairness, justice. If someone does something that hurts us, we can kind of empathize and understand why it's wrong then for us to do something that hurts someone else. But at the same time, we in the West especially, there has been this Christian tradition, and it has shaped the way we think in ways that people just don't realize today. So a lot of my friends who are humanists, who maybe they're atheists, and they say, hey, we just it's just obvious, isn't it, that humans should treat each other with equality, dignity, human value. And I would say to them, it's not at all obvious, actually. If you look at history, if you look at other parts of the world, that is not the way cultures have run. It's a very particular way that our culture has run for the last 2,000 years since Christianity began. And so I think it's really important to point people back towards the fact that if you like things like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was signed about 70 years ago, if you think that's a great foundation for how we should treat each other, it didn't just come out of thin air. It came because it was the end result of a long period of Christian history where people worked out this is the best way to treat each other. And it's on the basis of something right from page 1 of the Bible, which is that all of us are made in the image of God. And that gives us all ultimate value, ultimate dignity. And in cultures where they haven't had that belief, you won't find that kind of view of people. People are disposable. There are some people who are at the bottom of the pile, and if you happen to work your way to the top, then hey, that's just the way the gods have blessed you. Okay. But in Christianity, there's this very unique idea of the intrinsic dignity and value of every single person. And if you've got a friend who says, I don't need Christianity, I don't need religion, I just believe in the value of human beings, you've still got to ask, where did you get that belief from? It didn't just pop out of thin air. It's because you've been raised in a Christian culture, or a culture that owes its values to Christianity, even if it's now moving into this post-Christian period. And that, I think, is so important to help remind people that these beliefs you have in justice, equality, human dignity, human value, they're kind of fragile. They're not necessarily stick around if we abandon Christianity. And as we start to develop our own narratives, our own ways of being and everything else, then we're going to realize actually these things might go away if we're not very careful.
It reminds me, Justin, I think, in your book, you mention a conversation you had with Richard Dawkins, and I think this is exactly the theme you chose to talk to him about in the 10 minutes or so you had with him. And you asked him whether it was okay that morality was arbitrary, like you were just describing, and whether, I think you said something like, if we think rape is wrong, is that as arbitrary as us having 5 fingers instead of 6? And he said yes. And why is, I mean, you've already said it,
can
but
I
why is
quote
that
it?
wrong?
Can I quote it? Because I've got it right
Go for
here.
it.
And I thought I'd just have it ready because it is very relevant. So this is the book I wrote, Unbelievable, and it's kind of my case for faith. But yeah, this is going back about 10 years or more. And I had an opportunity to do a kind of very quick discussion debate with Richard Dawkins. For those who don't know, he's one of the most well-known atheists in the world. He wrote this book called The God Delusion that, has gone around the world. Anyway, he did a great debate in Oxford with John Lennox, who you had on the conference just 2 days ago. And they were debating God in the Natural History Museum in Oxford. And at the after show party, I managed to get a quick interview with Richard Dawkins, where we talked about this very issue. Like you say, Luke, it was this sort of question of, did we just evolve our morality, and we just happen to have got what we got? Or is there something beyond us? Is there something that actually, is there a standard that lives outside ourselves? And this is exactly how our conversation went. So I said to him, but if we'd evolved into a society where rape was considered fine, would that mean that rape is fine? And he said, well, I don't want to answer that question. I'm doing my best Richard Dawkins impression here. Okay?
That's very good. Yeah.
I don't want to answer that question. It's enough for me to say that we live in a society where it's not considered fine. We live in a society where selfishness, failure to pay your debts, failure to reciprocate favors is regarded askance. That is the society in which we live, and I'm very glad. That's a value judgment. Glad that I live in such a society. So I said, but when you make a value judgment, don't you yourself immediately step outside of this evolutionary process and say that the reason this is good is that it's good, and you don't have any way to stand on that statement? And he replied, well, my value judgment itself could come from my evolutionary past. And I said, so therefore it's just as random in a sense as any product of evolution. He said, you could say that. In any case, nothing about it makes it any more probable that there's anything supernatural. To which I said, okay, but ultimately your belief that rape is wrong is as arbitrary as the fact we've developed 5 fingers rather than 6. And he said, you could say that. Yes. And you could say that. And I think actually you should say that if you're a thoroughgoing atheist, if you're a naturalist like Richard Dawkins. Our morality is just kind of the happenstance of what evolution happens to have dealt us at this moment. Okay. but none of us actually believe that. None of us actually live our lives like that. We actually
right.
believe there's rape really is wrong. Okay, that's a non-negotiable, if you know what I mean. And so we've got to ask ourselves, well, then it's not just evolution. Okay, there's something beyond it. And I thought that was a good example of a conversation that does that.
Yeah, just really brief about that. There is, I mean, on evolution, or against the background of evolution, rape is, I mean, we consider rape to be wrong. Just it's arbitrarily so. However, there is actually a good book I like to quote to atheists who, again, refer back to evolution for morality. There is a book called A Natural History of Rape. It's written by a biologist and an anthropologist, both atheists, and they say that on an evolutionary perspective, it actually makes sense for human males to rape females in certain situations, because if it's all about passing on your genes, then if you're a male who can't get to pass on your genes through consensual sex, well, then you might force yourself on a female. So these are two atheists who are saying, well, evolution would actually tell us that rape is a good thing in certain circumstances. And then the rest of the book, they wrestle with this question, but well, we don't quite agree with that. So how do we deal with that tension,
And this is the point, is that a lot of people think these days that, well, science has the answers,
That's right.
You want to know what to do, science will tell you. Okay, that's kind of been the mantra of a lot of the atheists. But that's the point. Science is neutral. Okay, science can tell you what happens under certain circumstances. It'll tell you, what will happen if you split the atom. Okay, but it doesn't tell you what you should necessarily do with that. Okay, and likewise, the evolutionary story, it'll say, well, this is happening here and that's happening there. None of it's telling you how you should live your life. Okay, that's a decision we make, and it's something that we have to go somewhere else to make those kinds of decisions. Science is great for what it can explain about the natural world. Okay, no problem with that. But when it comes to morality, purpose, identity, it's not got a lot to tell you. And that's where we need something else. And for me, that was obviously comes through Christianity. It comes through the person of Jesus Christ, specifically, the identity he gives us, and the purpose and the example of his life, which for me is, if we could bring our world back to seeing the way that is the best vision for life, it could be transformative, because people are so confused now. They don't know what to believe. They don't know who they're supposed to be. They don't know what their identity is anymore, because they've been given so many options. And actually, Jesus Christ is waiting there to give them the answer again, for a generation that's hopelessly lost on that front.
And that's exactly where we'd want to get to also, especially in this conversation, is how can we show this other, this good and true side of morality as we see it in God. But there's a challenge in this, because often morality is a very common thing that comes up in conversations with non-Christians. And it seems like even more recently, this has really turned, whereas maybe some time ago the church was seen as having moral authority, now a lot of people look at the church as immoral, and they say that they're haters. They hate the LGBTQ community. They're arrogant in their exclusive beliefs, and it's a strange time for us as followers of Jesus. Before, we might have been trying to defend the intellectual aspect of the faith, and it feels like today the biggest front is this one that we're talking about. It's this moral front. How can we show the morality that we find in God? How can we respond well when society around us is making this accusation that the church is immoral, that we don't have a moral authority anymore?
It's a huge question. And it's one where I think, firstly, we need to hold our hands up and admit when we have got it wrong. And obviously, the church is, in a sense, a human institution. It's made up of humans, and so it's going to get things wrong. And we've got to be honest and hold our hands up when we do get it wrong. There have been so many times down history when the church has been wrong about things, when we have not shown the love of Christ, we've not represented Christ in the way we should, and it still happens today. So there are lots of instances where I could happily say to my secular atheist friend who's criticizing the church, yeah, I agree with you, the church didn't get that right. But the thing I would simply say to that person is, don't judge Christianity just on the behavior of its worst adherents. Okay, it ultimately is about Jesus. I promise not to judge atheists on the behavior of their worst members either. Okay, but the point is that the only way people are going to hear our message in the first place is if we actually look like Jesus, and Jesus told us that himself. Okay, you know, when they see the love you have, that's when they'll know that you're my disciples. It's not actually by our clever arguments or our brilliantly put together doctrine. The first thing people are going to be looking at is, do they look like they love each other? Do they look like they're a kind of community I'd want to be part of? And so that has to be the starting point. And wherever we fail to represent Jesus in the way we act, the tone, the grace, the love that we exhibit, that doesn't mean we dial down, you know, what we believe about life and about the way it should be lived, but it's the way that often it's put across that obviously puts people off. So I think that's the first thing, is to say, I understand why people would say, you know, the church has no moral authority when you look at some of the things it's done. Having said that, though, I would also want to help those people see that I'd ask, well, where is the moral authority these days then? Who does get to decide what is right and wrong? Because it's very difficult to see where that is coming from at all in today's age. And it's almost like, for me, some of the modern ideologies, they've become quite religious in nature themselves. Actually, there's almost a puritanical streak, you know, in some degrees. You know, when you go on Twitter and certain sort of cliques of people, there's this kind of righteous anger that comes out if, you know, people go against the things that they believe. That, you know, if you're cancelled, it's like being cast out because you're a heretic. You know, there's this kind of religious nature actually. And so the problem is, in my view, is that when people get rid of one form of religion, they just replace it with another. We're inherently religious. Okay, we have to have a kind of things that we gather around, ideas, ideologies. There has to be real right and wrong, because that's the way we make sense of life. Okay, and the problem is, if you say, well, the church isn't it anymore, you're only going to replace it with something else. And what people, I think, are finding is that those things don't actually ultimately help in the end either, because we can't agree, as I said earlier, on what the right way of looking at life is. So I think the church has to definitely hold its hands up, but also to say, okay, don't look at us, look at Jesus. Okay, for some reason, I think, for all the bad that the church is known for all the you know, the things we've got wrong, and the polls tell us, you know, people don't regard the church as having some moral voice. It's interesting that nonetheless people still have this respect for Jesus. That doesn't seem to have gone away. People still believe that Jesus is somehow an example of good living, righteousness, and so on. And I think that's a testament to the power of the person of Jesus in the Gospels, that it's very hard to deny just how good Jesus is when you read the Gospels. And for me, that's who we need to be pointing people back towards, not to the church per se, but to, you know, the person behind it all, Jesus Christ.
That's great. That's great. One kind of taken in a slightly different way now. There's kind of the atheistic debate around morality. And a lot of people in the global youth culture are not atheist. In fact, they're still believe in some kind of vague spirituality. And actually what I've seen a lot is a lot of people are influenced kind of by Eastern religious thought, and that how that affects their morality, which allows for a more relativistic, universalistic view of morality. Have you experienced that, or how do you see that playing into this whole equation?
I think you're absolutely right. Not that many people I meet are necessarily hard and fast atheists. Okay, now my show tends to deal more with people who are very kind of strictly naturalistic, deterministic, you know, atheist types. But actually, the average person on the street probably wouldn't go that far, and they would say something like, "Yeah, I just believe there's a kind of, maybe there's some kind of life force. You know, there's something." And that idea has been around for ages. Actually, in fact, if you go and read Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis has this wonderful section in Mere Christianity where he talks about, you know, the average person these days likes to think that there's some kind of life force in the universe. They won't give it the name God, but they will say there's something there. And he talks about the fact people are very happy to sort of ride on the crest of this life force when it suits them, you know.
Right.
But he said the thing about this life force is, it's the reason people like it is because it doesn't make any demands on your life.
Exactly.
He says so if you want to do something a bit shabby, he says, suddenly, well, the life force doesn't care, because the life force is just a sort of personal force. It's not gonna tell me that I'm doing anything right or wrong at this point. And he says, he ends it by saying something like, is the life force the greatest invention of wishful thinking the world has ever seen? Basically, it's this idea that we like to have this tame version of God, where it gives us the nice feels and it gives us the sense that, well, there's something beyond me, but it doesn't make any demands on me. That's the main thing. And I think whenever you've got that, you've got a sort of toothless, tame God of our own creation. And that's what a lot of people, I think, have ultimately. And what I love about Lewis is he says the really interesting thing begins when you realize there's a God who is not tame on the other end, and a God who makes demands on your life. Because that is when you start to realize that actually it's not about you, it's not about your personal preferences. God cares about the way you're living your life, who you're going to be, and what direction you're going in. And for me, that's part of the culture. It's part of helping people understand we live in this me-centered culture, and we even create God in our own image in that way. It's just the kind of the thing that helps me get through life, and but actually God's much bigger than that. God cares about the way you live. God has a demand on your life, and that's scary, but actually it's the best possible thing you can do is put yourselves in the hands of that God. So yeah, that's the challenge. How do we introduce people to the God who is a living God, who who's not a tame lion, as C.S. Lewis would say. He's a living, fearful, but ultimately loving God. Yeah.
Good. I think it's about framing morality in a positive vision for that, rather than seeing it as kind of a restrictive kind of thing that prevents your freedom and your fun. It's a positive vision of morality. And a lot of the people that I interact with, especially those that have kind of Eastern religious influences, it's about saying, well, actually, if I'm just kind of a random evolutionary product and I believe in some vague power, but really it's I get to decide, that's actually a scary place, because there's no anchor or source that I can go to that says this is good for you. And I guess to me it's about seeing the morality of Jesus framing it in a way that is positive and good, rather than restrictive and punishing. I don't know, that's been helpful for me in this kind of dialogue. How do you frame the morality more in a vision like that, as opposed to kind of maybe the religious view that people have?
Yeah, I think you're dead right. And I think the problem is many people, even when you say the word Christian, Christ, church, they have a preconceived notion. And for a lot of them, it still is that idea of this place you go where you basically get preached at and told all the things you're doing wrong and all the things you should be doing. Okay. And sadly, that is, the image of church and Christianity that a lot of people have imbibed, either subconsciously or maybe they've had a bad example of Christianity growing up in that way. I mean, ultimately, it's only going to change when people actually meet another Christian, someone who is actually looks like Christ, feels like Christ, talks like Christ. So that's down to each one of us, okay? And it's about us being the people. And the one thing in my show that makes the big difference, okay? If ever someone makes a move from kind of a secular atheism towards faith, it's very rarely just on the basis of a great intellectual argument. Okay, now that has its place. Okay, the arguments are important, but it's the example as well of the individual. It makes so much difference when people's preconceptions are broken down. Okay, it's because a lot of people come on my show with a particular conception of the kind of Christian they're going to meet, and if that person actually, blast those conceptions apart, suddenly they're opened up to the possibility that there may be something in this after all. And so for me, that's what it's got to be. It's about us living a life that isn't about look at all these rules I have to obey. It's about look at this freedom I have, look at this extraordinary. And I think part of that is helping people to see that you're not anymore you think you're free, but you're not free. Okay. And that's what I loved about the intro video as well. People are absolutely bound down by things in the culture today. They may not realize it, but they are. They're people. So many people that I meet are basically kind of in chains over social media, the way they have to present themselves, the way they have to speak and act, and the kind of persona that they have to be. They're often privately bound by addictions, whether it be that kind of social media addiction, a porn addiction, whatever. There's so many ways in which actually people who think they're free are not free. And there's that phrase, isn't there, in Christianity, that true freedom is service, and it's actually by submitting ourselves to Jesus that we find true freedom. That's the paradox of Christianity. You will never meet someone who is more free than someone whose life is fully submitted to Jesus Christ. And but we need people to see that is not some kind of prison sentence, some death sentence. It is a death sentence because it's kind of saying, I'm going to die to all of that stuff, but it's freedom on the other side. And that the only way people get a taste of that is if they see it coming out in our lives. And that's the big challenge.
Yes, and speaking about great minds gradually investigating Jesus, and we often watch and hope and pray for people that we see doing that. And you've had very interesting guests on your show. One of them in the early days when he was starting to grow in popularity was Jordan Peterson. And there was an interview that came out a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if you've seen it yet, but I'd love to show a short clip. And it relates to morality, because Jordan Peterson is a non-Christian psychiatrist, thinker, who's most of our listeners probably heard of. But he really seems to be thinking and asking questions that relate to religion, spirituality, God. He did some talks on the Bible. And this particular moment really got me going, wow, something is going on there. And he mentions morality as an important reference for him to think about God. And Aaron, if you could show that, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, Justin, after.
Sure.
So you can think about Christ from a psychological perspective, and the critic, my critic, this particular critic that I've been reading, said, well, that doesn't differentiate Christ much from a whole sequence of dying and resurrecting mythological gods. And of course, people have made that claim in comparative religion. Joseph Campbell did that, and Jung to a lesser degree, I would say, but Campbell did that. But the difference, and C.S. Lewis pointed this out as well, the difference between those mythological gods and Christ was that there's a representation of, there's a historical representation of his existence as well. Now, you can debate whether or not that's genuine. You can debate about whether or not he actually lived and whether there's credible objective evidence for that, but it doesn't matter in some sense, because this, well, it does, but there's a sense in which it doesn't matter because there's still a historical story. And so what you have in the figure of Christ is an actual person who actually lived, plus a myth. And in some sense, Christ is the union of those two things. The problem is I probably believe that, but I don't know. I'm amazed at my own belief, and I don't understand it. Like, because I've seen sometimes the objective world and the narrative world touch. That's Jungian synchronicity. Yeah. And I've seen that many times in my own life. And so in some sense, I believe it's undeniable. We have a narrative sense of the world. For me, that's been the world of morality. That's the world that tells us how to act. It's real. Like, we treat it like it's real. It's not the objective world, but the narrative and the objective world touch. And the ultimate example of that in principle is supposed to be Christ. But I don't know what to, that seems to me oddly plausible.
Yeah.
But I still don't know what to make of it. It's partly because it's too terrifying a reality to fully believe. I don't even know what would happen to you if you fully believed it.
Wow.
Powerful moment, wasn't it?
It was. And I have watched the interview in full. In fact, I'm in talks with Jonathan Pageau, who's his discussion partner coming on the show actually to talk a little bit
Great.
about it and about
Oh,
his
wow.
his own thoughts as well.
He's Orthodox, right?
That's right. He's a carver of Orthodox icons, Jonathan Pageau, and so he's got a and I think they've been friends for some time, even before Peterson kind of went stratospheric, as it were, with his recognizability. But the it's just an amazing, it is an amazing clip, and I've been really interested myself in Jordan Peterson's journey, and I had him on my show about 3 years ago now for this first season of what we call the Big Conversation. It's a special sort of video discussion series from Unbelievable. And he was really playing the role of the Christian in that debate opposite an atheist, basically arguing for the fact that we need the concept of God to make sense of life. I mean, that was his ultimate point. And I think that's a point he makes frequently elsewhere. The interesting thing is he hasn't quite reconciled himself yet to the idea of God as a living, breathing, not just that life force we talked about earlier, but a God who has a claim on his life. And he sees the extraordinary attraction of Jesus Christ, and he sees the way that, as he says, Christ brings the objective and the narrative together. There's this objective fact about a person called Jesus Christ who lived in history, and then there's this kind of vision of Christ, which is this kind of absolute, what we call the Son of God, the one in whom everything exists and to whom everything is owed, and who gives us the vision for what life should be. And he sees that in Jesus these kind of two things meet, and that has been the way in which so many people have understood life, and he finds himself strangely drawn towards that great mystery, but he doesn't know if he can commit himself to it. And it's because, as he said in the end of that, it's just almost terrifying.
Yeah.
And I see Peterson as one of those people for whom they get it. They really get it, actually.
Yeah.
More sometimes than a lot of Christians get it, if I'm honest.
Yes, that's right.
Because he recognizes, if this is true, it changes everything. Okay.
Right.
And we need to recognize that too, because sometimes we actually forget that. Okay. We tend to live our life without recognizing just what a difference it makes if the God of the universe has actually stepped into time and history, and I believe I'm in a relationship through that. And so for me, it's incredibly exciting to see Peterson on this journey, and I think we'll all cheer if and when he kind of crosses that line, whatever that looks like. But for me, that maybe the more important thing is that he's opening up this conversation to all kinds of interesting people who normally wouldn't give Christianity a second glance.
Yes.
But actually they're hearing it from someone they respect, someone who's gone on a crazy journey over the last year anyway himself, and who actually doesn't just deal with it on a purely philosophical, intellectual level, but you can see from that video the way it personally impacts his, it matters whether this is true or not.
Right.
And for me, that's really exciting.
And Justin, the thing that really caught my attention in relation to this conversation, you said it yourself earlier in our conversation, that the conversation around morality is probably one of the strongest points in which people can realize God, or see God revealing himself through that. And it seems like that's one of the key points for Jordan Peterson, because he says that a place where he sees what he calls that narrative perspective with the objective world coming together in morality. And that was, at some points in our conversation, you were saying, morality is that thing that it's objective, and it's also, there's intrinsic value. There's a God-given value to it. And it's almost like, it seems like that's one area of life that is speaking to him. And it just made me think that how important this issue is, this topic, in our conversations with people, when we go out, when we share our faith with our friends, in our mission work that we do with Steiger, how important it is that we know how to help people see the character of God, and why our sense of justice and morality, like you said, really points to that, and how helpful it can be for people to realize that and find God through that too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is it. It's got to be both, and we need to sort of have, it's important we have that intellectual understanding.
Yes.
So that when we meet the person who says, oh, but we can all just believe what we want and we'll get on fine, you can say to that person, why do you believe that? Where's the evidence for that? You've got to have that sort of intellectual side to say, where does this belief you have in justice and the value of human beings, where does that reside? But we also have to have that other side of it, which is, do I look like I care about that? Actually, does it make a difference to me? Is the way I'm interacting with this person, is it something they would want to embrace? Because ultimately that's why people came to Jesus. It's because he was so attractive to them, the way he lived his life. And then when they listened to him, he had the words of life as well. He had the truth as well. So it's bringing those together, the intellectual truth and the witness that we have.
That's good.
Justin, we're going to do right now, we're going to take a short break. We're going to start to compile questions from the audience. We want to just give the audience a chance to ask some questions. There's been a bunch coming through. So we'll take this break. Also, when we get back, Justin, I'd love for you to share about your conference and other things that you've got coming up that our audience can benefit from. So we'll allow you to speak to that as well. And then we'll have some time of question and answer before wrapping it up. So this has been awesome. And guys, throw in your questions. We'll pull them together. And after the break, we'll bring them to Justin. So let's go to break.
There is no right and there is no wrong. This is something you hear all the time. And on the surface, it sounds good, like you're being tolerant or inclusive. Accept everyone. All ideas are equal. There is no right and there is no wrong. But if you dig a little deeper, is it really that simple? After all, do we accept the person that accepts no one? If all ideas are equal, what about the idea that not all ideas are equal? You see, these statements disagree with themselves. They're self-refuting. It's like bringing a gun to a peace protest. It just doesn't make sense. Deep down, I think we know some things are wrong, like theft or murder, domestic violence, destroying the environment, child abuse. What about racism or bigotry? See, deep down, what I think we really mean, what we're really after, is that people are loved and respected. When we marginalize people and devalue them, that is wrong. But that brings us back to the beginning, to that thing you hear all the time. There is no right and there is no wrong. Can we just agree that this does not make sense? Can we agree that it's time to think a little deeper?
It spans the globe like a superhighway. It is called internet.
We live in a time of unprecedented connectedness. Mass media, economic strategies, and above all, the internet have eroded cultural boundaries. Young people today are more similar than ever, making up a truly global youth culture.
They can point and click their way across the ocean.
The religion of the global youth culture is secular humanism, which says that God has been replaced, man is at the center, and there is no outside authority that can tell me how to live my life. On the surface, this generation believes there is no absolute truth, and therefore no universal morality. Everyone is free to choose for themselves what is right and what is wrong. In reality, certain values are dogmatically defended, and those unwilling to conform will be canceled. We are told that the key to happiness is found within. Just follow your dreams. Don't let anyone tell you who you are or what you want. Take care of yourself above all else. This may sound liberating, but we are anything but free. We have grown up in a world dominated by video games, pornography, and social media. These industries spend billions of dollars working around the clock with the sole purpose of making their content more and more addictive. And it's working. We spend hours a day interacting in virtual worlds, trying to live up to the carefully curated lives of pop stars and internet influencers that we follow online. This is leading to an epidemic of loneliness, anxiety, depression, and suicide. Without a moral compass, an anything goes attitude has been adopted when it comes to sexuality. Sex is meaningless, gender a personal choice, monogamy a joke. But it's not all bad. There is hope. This generation is passionate about injustice. They care about the oppressed and the marginalized. They want to use their lives to make a difference in the world. A commitment to tolerance has made them open to spiritual conversations, which can be an opportunity to share the gospel. On top of that, the internet has made it possible to reach millions of people instantly. Social media is being used to share the gospel in places previously impossible to reach. If we are going to reach the global youth culture, we have to understand the unique challenges that they are facing and how we can best respond. It starts by recognizing the large cultural gap that exists between the church and this global generation. In order for us to reach them, we need to go to their places and learn how to communicate with them in a way they will understand. Most importantly, this cannot just be a trend to study or statistics to analyze. These are our brothers, our sisters, our sons and daughters, friends and coworkers. Our heart needs to break for them. Things might seem bad, but there is hope. God is greater than the problems facing the global youth culture. And if we ask him, he will use our lives to reach them.
Steiger is experiencing explosive growth around the world. And while this is exciting, we recognize that this comes with a danger of forgetting who we are and how we got here. We have prayerfully identified 6 core values which anchor us, even as our strategies may change depending on the context that we are in. All of those who represent Steiger around the world can be identified by their commitment to these core values. They are: seek God. We believe that God rewards those who seek him with a desperate heart. We know that if God takes his hand off of us, we are dead. And without his power, our efforts to reach people will fail. It's not our plans or strategies that change the world, but the infusion of God's power into all he asks us to do. With this in mind, we push ourselves and each other to desperately seek God through diligent prayer, in-depth study of his word, and passionate worship. Preach the cross. The world is broken and people are hurt and lost. This is the consequence of our sin and rebellion. And only Jesus' death and resurrection can break the power it has over us. That's why we will always preach Christ and him crucified, believing that when we do, God unleashes his power and lives are changed. We are always asking God for relevant ways to preach the cross while acknowledging the fact that it will always be foolish and it will always be difficult. Be relevant. Jesus was relevant, and we aim to model ourselves after him. He knew people in an intimate way, and because of this was able to communicate his message powerfully. We want to do the same. We push beyond the surface to connect with people. We share our lives, and in the process, God breaks our hearts for them. Only then can we communicate the message of the cross in a language that the global youth culture will understand, while at the same time never changing, obscuring, or omitting the biblical gospel message. Relevance is never about popularity, it's about clarity, wanting nothing to obscure the gospel from being understood. Strive for holiness. God has called us to go outside the church and to share our lives with those who are far from him without conforming to the moral standards of the world. In Steiger, we value a holy and pure lifestyle out of a sincere desire to obey and serve God. We take sin seriously, embrace accountability, and hold each other to high standards. We strive for holiness in the hope that nothing in our lives will be a barrier to God using us to share his love with the global youth culture. Have courage. You can have a broken heart for the lost. Pray desperately. Have a deep understanding of the people you're trying to reach. But without courage, you will do nothing. Courage is not the absence of fear, but rather a willingness to step through fear. Steiger believes that this courage comes from a deep trust in God, in his promises developed by diligently studying his word, by daily committing to seek him. Steiger seeks the courage to defy conventional thinking, ask for extraordinary things of God, speak the truth boldly, even if it's not popular, take great risks, and sacrifice safety, security, and reputation, all for the sake of the gospel. We are family. We are called to reach the global youth culture for Jesus. But we cannot do it as individuals because on our own, we lack the needed gifts, insights, and abilities to see God's work accomplished through us. Together, we are stronger than we will ever be apart. We are not just co-workers, we are family. This means we care for each other, have each other's backs, and stick together in good and hard times. Seek God, preach the cross, be relevant, strive for holiness, have courage. We are family. These are our values.
All right, we're back. All right, so we got some questions rolling in. Throw Justin on the screen too, since he's the one that has to answer.
Yeah, we
them.
kind
There
of
go.
need Justin.
All right. Hey, Justin, by the way, that was just awesome session with
Yeah,
you. Thank you
that's
for
right.
your wisdom and your answers. Is so good. So good.
Thank you guys.
Before we get into the question, Justin, would you just share a little bit about the conference, Unbelievable Conference, and other resources that you have for our people?
Yeah, sure. I'm just gonna screen share a few things. First of all, we talked about him earlier, but here he is, Jordan Peterson, and he's opposite Susan Blackmore in that photo. This is from our big conversation
He
series.
looks angry
and
or upset or something there, Justin.
she looks very frustrated at that point, and Jordan Peterson has a wry smile. It's a great episode if you get a chance to go and watch it. But basically, the big conversation is a series where we bring some of the biggest intellectuals together to debate some of the biggest questions in life. So if you want more about it, I'll share a link in the chat. We're just going to be starting season 3 on the 2nd of April, Good Friday, in fact. And we're starting with a fantastic discussion between a well-known atheist YouTuber, Cosmic Skeptic, opposite one of the leading kind of Christian intellectuals in the YouTube sphere, Bishop Robert Barron. So they're going to be debating Christianity and atheism, which makes best sense of us. So do follow the big conversation. The bigconversation.show is the place to go if you want to find out more. I'll pop that in the chat now.
Yep, there it is.
But we're really looking forward as well to Unbelievable, the conference, which is taking place on Saturday, the 15th of May. And again, I'm just going to, if I may, share my screen. And Tom Wright is an amazing thinker. I don't know if you guys can see that, the poster there. It's kind of got a Star Wars vibe going on.
It's got a Star Wars vibe.
And
May the force be with you.
Absolutely. Anyway, N.T. Wright is one of the most preeminent theologians in the world. He's an extraordinary scholar, New Testament historian. He's going to be joining us for the day, along with the guy at the bottom there looking to screen is Tom Holland. And he's just got the most amazing story. He's a really interesting historian who currently is just on a very interesting kind of similar Peterson-esque journey, really, towards Christianity. And he will tell in the conference about the way he came to realize that amorality, what we consider valuable in the West, all stems from the Christian story. That's been really the work of the last several years for him. We've got some other great contributors, Sean and Josh McDowell, both wonderful apologists. Claire Williams from the UK, from Get Real, is going to be talking about urban apologetics. Myself and Ruth Jackson will be hosting the conference. So if you want to join us for that, we'd love to see you there. Unbelievable.live is the place to book in, to register for Saturday, the 15th of May. We're kind of doing it in the afternoon hour time so that people in the US especially can join us, but you can get hold of all the sessions afterwards as well. So go and check that out. I won't share the video I have of Tom Wright personally inviting you, but that's there on the website if you go and watch that. And yeah, doing kind of what you're doing here, guys, really about helping people to engage the culture, helping people to, especially in a COVID age, look at some of those big questions around how do we meaningfully engage people. And as the conference title suggests, how to tell the greatest story ever told. People kind of forgotten the story that shaped them, the story that gave a meaning and narrative to their life. And I think the challenge for Christians today is to tell that story again to today's generation and make them realize that life really doesn't mean anything without this story of Jesus Christ at the center of it. So that's what we'll be aiming to do.
So good. So good. And if I could say, because a lot of the people here today are connected in some way to Steiger city teams around the world. And we have a kind of a philosophy in our mission of bringing together, bringing together some tensions around what we call the head, heart, and feet. And the idea of the head is that we want to be culturally relevant, understand people, biblically sound, and really know how to answer the tough questions, which is what this event and your event are all about, equipping people to do. And then we want to combine that with the heart, which for us means complete dependence on the Lord and the power of the Holy Spirit moving through us, seeking God desperately, that we don't want to just have our head, we also want the heart. And then finally, the feet, that we put that into action with boldness and courage and taking risks and not waiting for everything to be perfect. And our view is if you combine all three, it's dynamite. And so we love resources like yours, whether it's your podcast or this event, because it helps our people grow in their ability to connect at the head level with the global youth culture. So very grateful for your resources, and we will definitely be pushing our people that way. To get into the questions, I have a very important question to start. See, I'm kind of a big deal on TikTok, and I noticed that you keep showing up on my For You page. So how did you get it? Is this, what are you doing with TikTok? And what's the goal there?
Well, this is all really down to my 16-year-old son, Noah, who is the TikTok master really in our house. He's been on TikTok for over a year now, I would say. And he's got his own kind of niche. He kind of does kind of money-making entrepreneurial tips for teenagers, basically. So he'd kind of established this, and he was saying to me, "Oh, Dad, you should put some of your, apologetic stuff on TikTok. I think there's a place for that." And I was like, "Oh, maybe I'll get around to it one day." Well, anyway, finally got around to it over the Christmas break. We said, "Okay, let's do this," and I shot a couple of videos, and yeah, it kind of took off surprisingly. In fact, I think it was the second or third video I made suddenly went viral as far as these things do. It's now on like 6 million views on TikTok. It was basically just a response to someone who, because I'd done a couple of arguments, kind of classic philosophical arguments for the existence of God, and someone said, "Yeah, but if God created everything, who created God?" Classic question. So I did this kind of analogy with building blocks, and that just seemed to catch people's attention, and so I found myself going, my number of followers increasing. And so I felt like, oh, well, I should probably put some more videos out now. So I did some more. I've done a few apologetics, sort of 60-second thoughts on things like suffering and evidence for the resurrection and other things. So yeah, it's been exciting. And I think I'm on about just over 200,000 followers now, which is great. Still way behind my son, who is now on 500,000 followers. So I'm in here. He's way ahead of me on TikTok. But no, it's exciting. It's kind of technology moves so fast, doesn't it? And young people. I feel old saying young people, but it's like following where people are actually looking is so critical if we're going to do mission. And I'm not saying I'm at all the best person at doing this, but you realize actually it's not necessarily that hard. You've got a decent little bit of kit, you've got a camera, you've got an interesting idea, it works. I didn't have to kind of spend a year researching this. I just thought of something, put it on, and hey, if people like it, they watch it, they share it. So yeah, it's exciting.
And TikTok's a unique platform because it has that ability for more people to go viral. In the way that it works is it's created the middle class of creators, as they say, whereas YouTube is more just a select elite. So it's great. It was good to see you there, and it's keep up the good work. So
thank you. It's just about time, though, to be honest. I always struggle with just finding the time to kind of sit down and come up with a 60-second script and put something out there. But it's great when people do see it and respond to it. Yeah.
Justin, I want to pick up on something you mentioned before the break, which is when it comes to life force and God and morality. Morality, I guess, more than any other topic that is discussed in apologetics, is it really gets to our hearts, and it matters to us emotionally and not just on an intellectual level. And I think here what I realize is that it's very important to see those arguments or those discussions in the bigger picture light, in the sense, like also spiritually, in the following sense. I had once a girl talking to me. She was from a Muslim background, and then became agnostic, new agey Eastern religions and stuff, and then she started a journey towards Christ. She had like a bit of supernatural stuff happening to her, Christ appearing to her, and she said, Lucas, there was a point in my life, I knew that Christ is the real deal. I was absolutely convinced he is it. But I didn't want to embrace him because I knew I would have to change my life. And she specifically said, and I guess that's oftentimes what people mean when they say about changing their lives. She said, well, I knew I'd have to change how I live out my sexuality. It would just not be anymore that anything goes. And I didn't like it. And that's why it took me much longer, even after I realized that Christ is the truth, to actually submit to him. And so I want to encourage all of us, again, to see those discussions in the right light, that ultimately people are in rebellion against God. That's the state that the Bible describes the human condition, how the Bible describes the human condition. And so it's when people put up those arguments, sometimes they are real, or they put up those questions, they really have struggles and they honestly wrestle with those intellectual issues. But sometimes it's just that, they actually know the answers, but they don't want to go through with the consequences. And so it's, I think as we have these hard conversations, we really need to, ask God to help us to, to discern where are people really at? Where is their mind at? And where is their heart at? And to, how do you handle it? How you, even with your conversation partners on your show, how do you, try and look beyond the intellectual arguments?
And the intellectual arguments, I agree, Lucas, can often kind of be a smokescreen ultimately, sometimes for what is ultimately a heart issue. And I've always said, I don't think ultimately you can argue someone on purely intellectual grounds into the kingdom. Now, I'm not saying that they aren't important. Sometimes it's, for me, the value of apologetics is often removing particular objections that maybe stand in the way of someone walking down the road towards Jesus. But they kind of have to want Jesus at the end of the road. You can't force someone to want Jesus. And if someone ultimately, if their heart is stopping them, if that's the ultimate blockage, I can't do anything about that. In a way, only Jesus can, and that's for me why prayer is the forgotten element so often. Apologists love their arguments, but they don't spend nearly enough time just praying for the people that they're arguing with, and this is the key. It's a spiritual battle as much as it is an intellectual battle or whatever, and we've got to pray. We've got to trust that God is moving and ask the Spirit to come in and to break down barriers and just for people's hearts and eyes and minds to be open, because ultimately, as you say, it's much more than intellectual arguments in the end.
That's right.
Justin, I'll bring a question from one of our audience related to that. It's Dirk Beigent from Austria, who's faithfully translating into German right now.
Wow.
He asks, have you ever experienced a conversion from an atheist speaker? Isn't that very hard because he or she loses their platform or maybe the way he makes a living?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think it's especially where someone is a kind of quote unquote celebrity atheist. Maybe they're well known in that sphere. I think it's hard for them to then potentially, take seriously or completely objectively evaluate the evidence. But that's true for all of us in a way. I'm a Christian. I run a Christian ministry. I can accept that atheists are going to say the same thing about me. I'm kind of invested in it in a way. But we all come to everything with our own perspective, our own biases. We just have to recognize that none of us are neutral on these things. But what I try to do on my show, especially, is to genuinely try and put the issues on the table and genuinely give them a fair airing and hear what people on both sides have to say. Ultimately, yes, there's a lot more going on under the surface for whether someone will ultimately choose to believe. As Lucas was just saying, there is a matter of the heart going on. There's going to be all kinds of other issues: psychological, spiritual, emotional, the history of this person. All of it will ultimately make up who that person is, apart from their intellectual objections or whatever. And so you kind of have to leave that in God's hands and commit it to God. Do what we can do faithfully, but say ultimately, yeah. And yes, there are people who have crossed the line. More with the show, especially, it's never like one 1 hour conversation changes someone's mind. It tends to be part of a bigger story, a bigger picture. But yeah, I'm so grateful to know some people who had been on the show who changed their mind, who became Christians later on. But everyone's on a journey of some kind. There are other people who were going in the other direction, and ultimately, it's not my responsibility in a way exactly what people do with the conversation that's had. I kind of have to say, I'll do my best, Lord, to put the right people together, have a good conversation, but ultimately it's between them and you ultimately what they make of that, and which direction they go in.
True.
Good. Another question from Nadia. She says, I have a friend who is sure that there is a higher force in the universe and that there is morality, but she refuses to accept that it is God. What argument can be more effective for her? So how do we engage someone from that perspective?
Sure. It's interesting because I suppose she probably has then some view of what God is. And I think you'd want to ask her, well, what do you mean by God? You don't believe there's a God, but you believe there's a higher force and there's this moral reality to the universe. Well, it sounds like she's part of the way there. She's got part of the picture. And I'd want to hear from her, well, what's the God that you don't believe in? Let's just start with that. And maybe you'll find actually, well, I don't really believe in that God either, because maybe they've got some idea of a sort of God who's standing ready to punish anyone who steps out of line. And there's a pictures of God, that people have. And sometimes you first of all have to dismantle the faulty picture of God before you can start talking people into a kind of what a true picture of God might look like. And for me, very often the wrong place to start is to sort of say, well, let's think of God as this, the immutable characteristics of God, his omnipotence, his divine benevolence, his omnipresence. None of that really, from the average person, helps them picture God. It just makes God this unknowable,
Theology.
abstract thing. Yeah. The point of Christianity is that God became knowable in a person, Jesus Christ. And so the first person I would say, if you want to know what God is like, look at Jesus. Okay. And that's the starting point for me, because that gives something tangible for people to focus on and say, what if God was somehow represented uniquely in this person, Jesus Christ? Let's look at that to start with. So that may be the point to start with if you're struggling to get your friend to kind of get an image of what God is like in a way.
Yeah, that's great. Justin, I want to pick up a question from Oscar Garcia from the audience. And he asks, how can I justify to a skeptic that morality comes from God? I guess before the break, we were talking about why atheism or evolution cannot give us morality, even though we feel like it's objective. But how do we move on to actually make a positive case for God, or maybe even for the Christian God specifically, with morality as backdrop?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think so. If we've established that this person believes there is a kind of a real moral realm, an objective moral realm, that we aren't just floating in a sea of relativism, and that some things really are right and wrong, then the question of how do we know that God is responsible for this moral realm? I think that's quite difficult in a way, because in a way it's about saying, if you like, we can show that naturalistic atheism doesn't deliver us this realm of objective moral values and duties. And the question is, well, how then do we show positively that the Christian God is the source of these objective moral values and duties? In a way, for me, that would be about simply saying, you recognize that these things exist, you see them, you feel them. Okay. Is there a source? What could that source be? Now, on a philosophical level, people can be what's called Platonists. They can believe that there's some kind of additional realm that exists. Okay. But for me, I find it very hard to see how if there's just this kind of realm, like a mathematical realm or something, of objective values and duties, how it makes any difference to me. Why should I follow these particular sets, these laws that are somehow written into reality, still don't kind of personally impact me. The only way that makes sense of the fact I feel I really should act this way, that it's really wrong to treat people in other ways, is if there's a kind of personal aspect to this, if there's a personality in whom this morality exists. And for me, it makes sense to say that is the Christian God, because from its inception, Christianity has said that God is love, for instance. That is a kind of a core idea, that the very one of those important aspects of morality, love, is God is defined by that characteristic. Okay. And in that sense, I think you just have to say morality isn't this kind of abstract impersonal force, okay, that we can kind of choose to obey or not. It comes to us, it makes demands of us, it's personal, and that means its source has to be personal. And the only way I can see to make sense of that is that that is God. And in the sense, if you want to make it even less abstract, again, I would point them towards Jesus Christ, who says, I am the way, the truth, the life. The way you act, who you are, the way you identify, it all somehow finds its ultimate purpose and reason in me. And for me, that's maybe the direction I would point someone in.
Yeah, that's great. And I want to kind of pick up, because you said, God is love. And we talked about this before, that it's very important for people to see that God is love in the way we live our lives. We had in our Bible study for skeptics, there was a guy, a young guy, a software engineer who came from quite a radical Muslim family, and he joined our Bible study. And then he like after a year or so, he said, "Hey, Lucas, you guys kept repeating or telling us that God is love, and I could never make sense of it. It just wouldn't make any sense to me." And then he said, well, then I saw people joining our group or this Bible study, which I thought they are very hard to love. And then I saw how you guys treated these. And he literally said, that's when these people, he said, well, I saw how you guys treated these people with love and respect. And he said, that's when it clicked. I just understood what you guys meant when you say that God is love, because I saw it in action. So again, I think, we can give explanations and try to explain to people who God is, but they really need to see it. That's what Jesus himself tells us. Yeah.
Well, we are a combination of the head and the heart, aren't we?
That's right.
And we can believe things with our head, but we don't really believe them until we accept them with
That's
our heart.
Right.
And for me, apologetics has to be both. If it's
That's
one or
right.
the other, if it's just the head, it becomes dry. It becomes the kind of thing you can kind of compartmentalize and put away. If it's all
That's
about
right.
the heart, it doesn't respond to people's genuine intellectual questions. When you bring them together, it's very, very powerful.
That's right.
So, yeah.
Yes.
There's another question here that I think is almost like the next step from what we were talking about, recognizing God and morality. Henrik Mach from Prague wrote this: how can we help guide people through the benefits of repentance and changing to a godly lifestyle? So when somebody already recognizes there is a God, I do want to know him, but then there's that moment of repentance, which I think it's a good question. It's exactly the question of morality, right and wrong. How do I change the lifestyle? So he's asking, how would you guide somebody through that understanding?
And it's a huge question, because that will all depend on the person, on their history, so much, and this is where discipleship is what it's about. It's wonderful to bring people to a point where they can recognize their need for Jesus and where they want to take that step. But the actual repentance and transformation is a lifelong process. For most people, that doesn't happen just overnight. Now, there are miraculous stories, aren't there, of people whose drug addiction vanished overnight when they became a Christian or whatever. But those, I think, are actually rare. I think most of us, even lifelong Christians, we still struggle with that transformational aspect of life, constantly dying to ourselves and being raised with Christ. And I can only do that, in all honesty, in a community, with other people who I'm on the journey with. So the first thing, anyone who is thinking of making that decision and wants to do that, they can't do it by themselves. Jesus gave us each other. He gave us the church because we're a community who encourages each other, lifts each other up when we fall over, and I would say that so it's got to be about helping someone to be part of a genuine Christian community where they can go on that journey of transformation and repentance, and accepting we will fall on our face a lot of the time. People who have lived a certain lifestyle and it's become ingrained and habitual and whatever, and there's all kinds of hard questions around what they do and don't do now. There's going to be lots of gray areas and difficulty, but ultimately being in community with other Christians and being willing to sort of have the grace that is needed to allow people to go on that journey and not get it right all the time, but kind of to learn and to grow. That's essential. And I think that's where we need to extend as much grace and hope to people and just encourage them alongside them as they start to look at their life and what needs to change about it.
That's so good, and it relates a lot as well to what we do in the mission. We've often talked about discipleship, using the term discipleship relationship, trying to emphasize exactly what you just said. It's that discipleship isn't just getting the right ideas in my head or going to a program where I'll finish the content and I'll know how to be a follower of Jesus. It is that relationship in community that you just described. And I think that it's all the more relevant to the audience that we're thinking of throughout this event, which is the young guys and girls around us who are coming from a background of no church, often never having read the Bible, and many of them coming from a relativistic background. And we tried addressing that throughout our conversation today. What does morality look like from the relativistic perspective? Is interesting. Similar to Lucas, I've had a few different opportunities of having Bible studies with people who have never read the Bible before. And I remember once we were having a Bible study with some guys in Germany, and we were reading a passage about sin and repentance, this question that Henrik just asked. And we were talking about it, and I realized that when they were talking about sin, they had a different perspective than what I meant when I said sin. So I asked them, what do you guys understand as sin? And they put it like this. They said, well, sin is the stuff I do that doesn't do me any good. And so we each have to decide what is sin for us, because if it doesn't do me good, then I will know, and I have to decide. And so I realized, wow, it takes time often for somebody to change their perspective on understanding the difference between that relativistic way of seeing the world and a biblical perspective that, as you were just saying, morality is based on a person. And he decides what's good and what's right for me. And sometimes I might recognize it as bad for me, and other times I don't realize. I need him to show me, and it's understanding the lordship of Jesus. So this process is so important, and it's good you were talking about the importance of relationship and community for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. We're going to do one more question. It's been an engaging conversation. Thank you, Justin. We could go on forever, of course. The question, there's two questions. One's from Michael. I can't say the last name, so I won't try. And Angelo from Brazil. And they're both around basically the definition of love and how when you say God is love, similar to what Luke was just saying, how what you say and what is received is not always, understood the same way we think. So if the concept of love is so critical, obviously, to who God is and evangelism, how do we clarify what love really means in light of kind of an evangelistic approach that might just say God is love or God loves you, the end, or it's so how do we respond to something like that?
Yeah, and again, so often people come with their own concepts, don't they, that have to kind of be understood and broken down sometimes. Just like you were saying, Luke, someone has this particular definition of sin, which is basically whatever I think is harming me, rather than maybe there is some real objective sense. But love equally can be misunderstood. A lot of people, when they hear the phrase God is love, they're going to think, oh, well, God's just some kindly old grandpa in the sky who kind of looks down at me and says, oh, it'll all be okay, it doesn't matter what you do, and actually, no, that's not really what love is. Actually, what love looks like in the Bible is a man being crucified and giving his, it's quite shocking, actually, sometimes what love looks like. And for me, that's the really important thing, is actually getting people to realize that love is costly, love is sacrificial. Love is not just these fleeting feelings you have, where you can start with this partner, and when you've decided you don't love them anymore, you move on to the next person. Love is more than that. Love is a choice. Love is a commitment. Love is a challenge, you know. And we've got to kind of help people to put away these kind of very vague, false notions of love and see this real, rich, deep form of love. I mean, the first place you could point people towards is that fabulous passage in 1 Corinthians 13, where it talks about the nature of love and says love is, you know, and it lists kind, bears all things, suffers all things. You know, we've got this amazing description of what love is, and that actually God is the embodiment of all of that. And I think the first thing to do is to recognize that none of us actually experience love in the world in that way. We all like to think that we experience love and we give love, but we give this very pale version of love, and we receive it's like, and love humanly experienced always lets us down. You know, the people we love the most also hurt us the most of the time. And so when people are coming to us, well, what is this God of love that you believe in? You've got to tell them it's not the kind of love that you may have experienced in your life, which is conditional and is basically, you know, reciprocal in some way. It's a love that is pure, extravagant, sacrificial, pure grace, and is there for you, but it will demand so much of you as well, because it's a love that won't want to see you stay the way you are. It's a love that wants you to be with him. It's a love that will challenge you to the core of who you are. So I think it's both. You know, it's saying it's bigger than you can imagine, but it's more exciting than you can imagine. It's more challenging than you can imagine, but it's worth it. It's worth it. Why settle for something less when you can have the real thing, when you can have God? So yeah, that's maybe where I go with that one.
It's awesome. Awesome. Justin, thank you so much. It's been an honor to have this conversation with you. Again, I want to encourage everyone to check out, go to unbelievable.live to learn more about the conference. Check out the Unbelievable podcast and the books and other resources that you have. It's you're great encouragement to us and very important part of the kingdom of God. So thank you for your contribution, and thank you for being part of this. We really appreciate it.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me on, guys.
All right.
We look forward to having you on our podcast again, Justin, sometime soon.
Yeah. That'd be fun. Fun to be with you again. Organized chaos.
That's right. That's how we do it. All right. We'll let Justin go. And again, guys, such a great and relevant conversation. I think the whole challenge of morality and relativism is so relevant to reaching the global youth culture. What do you guys, give me your summary thoughts, and then we'll transition.
Yeah, I was really impacted by realizing how important this particular question is for people today, and for people realizing who God is, because I think I've often seen it as a difficult question and how do I answer it well, and today's reminded me actually this is kind of a key way God is revealing himself. He reveals himself through our realization of right and wrong, of morality in our own lives, and seeing Jordan Peterson starting to recognize that more impacted me, and Justin confirmed that in a few times in our conversation. This is an important thing to talk about. It's a way that God can reveal himself to people today. So it's so cool.
Yeah, that's right. I agree, Luke. And I also think that, the challenge here is that people, like when we're dealing with morality, we're dealing something that people just take for granted. No one ever thinks, why do I think that racism is wrong? No one ever thinks, why do I think that rape is wrong and that true love is the real deal? They just, we just do it. And so I've experienced, that it takes people a long time, and you really have to challenge people with basic steps and go slowly to help them realize, well, there must be a source for why we think that there are things that are right and things that are wrong. And I think so I want to encourage all of us, let's be patient with the people we're trying to reach, and let's recognize that God is at work, even if we may not see it directly. Jordan Peterson is such a great example. And God is at work in his life, obviously, and that's the case. Yeah.
And one other thing, Aaron, that I think is cool for us to learn and apply in what we do is I forgot to ask him about this, but when Justin started the Unbelievable podcast, he's on a Christian radio, premier Christian radio in the UK. It's the Christian radio in the UK. And he says, he described it like this, that he realized that everything they did was good content for Christians. And he went to the producer and he said, can I have one moment in the week where we actually talk to non-Christians and have conversations with them? And that is so much the heart of what we're trying to communicate as a mission, isn't it? It's like, how can we, you know, when we talk about bands and artists, we're like, it's great to do good music and art for Christians, but can we have something that really engages with the non-Christian audience? And that can be applied in everything we do. That's at the heart. We want to know, how can we be close to those that wouldn't walk into a church today? How can we communicate clearly to them? So I appreciate Justin's heart in that. And I think it's something we can also learn more from as a mission.
Great. That's great. Well, don't go anywhere, because in a few minutes here, we're going to bring on David, the founder of Steiger, because, you know, the key in all of this is we don't want just good head knowledge and conversation. We want to apply this, and we want to use what God is teaching us here in the world. So in a minute, I'm going to bring on David. Quick couple of things to remind you. The next step in connecting with our teams is the regional call. There are going to be a number of regional calls for Europe, Brazil, Middle East, Russian-speaking world, North America, Latin America, and Asia Pacific. All of these are going to have a regional call that we would like you to be part of, to learn how you can be part of this mission. So make sure you connect. There's an image that was just put in the chat that shows when and how to get onto it. You will also get an email from the people in your region about this. So get connected. Let's not just talk about this, let's do something about it. We have many training opportunities available. The Steiger Mission School, the Steiger Intensive Tour. Go to our website, check those out, but get involved, take a step. That's what this whole mission is about. We do something together that we couldn't do apart. So with that, I'm going to let Lucas and Luke go and invite my dad to jump on here wherever he is. So let's see how this works.
Hey, how you doing?
Hey, Pops.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. So take it from here, Dad. What do you want to say to us?
Well, first of all, I thought I can't do this without bringing on one of our artists from Brazil. So, Moi, are you there?
Hello, everybody.
Yeah, I can't see you.
Can you see me now? I'm here.
So I asked Moi, you know, this has been an amazing first weekend, hasn't it?
Yes, it's been amazing.
So I thought Moi should read the countries of the people that have been involved in this first weekend.
So we have Argentina, Australia, Austria, Belarus, Brazil, Bulgaria, Canada, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Croatia, Cyprus, Czech Republic, Denmark, Dominican Republic, Ecuador, El Salvador, Estonia, Finland, France, Ghana, Germany, Guatemala, Honduras, Hong Kong, Hungary, India, Indonesia, Italy, Jamaica, One Love, Japan, Jordan, Kazakhstan, Latvia, Lebanon, Lithuania, Mexico, Moldova, Netherlands, New Zealand, Nicaragua, Nigeria, Norway, Pakistan, Panama, Paraguay, Peru, Philippines, Poland, Portugal, Romania, Russia, Saint Tomé and Príncipe, Saudi Arabia, Serbia, Singapore, Slovakia, South Africa, Spain, Sweden, Switzerland, Tanzania, Turkey, Ukraine, United Arab Emirates, United Kingdom, United States, Uzbekistan, Uruguay, Venezuela. Woo!
Woohoo! Hey, come on. We together we will change the world. You know, when I saw the video of Jordan Peterson and he's struggling with, what if Jesus rose from the dead? You know, what if Jesus really was a real man who came and who died and rose from the dead? It was like he was afraid of this idea. And the fact of the matter is, he has risen from the dead. And all of you from all over the world who have joined us have the same power that raised Jesus from the dead inside of you. In Ephesians 1:18, it says the same power that raised Christ from the dead is available to us. So even in a pandemic, when there's political and economic crisis, our most fruitful days are ahead. And I know, many of us right now feel weak. We feel overwhelmed. But the point is this: Jesus' kingdom is like a mustard seed. Jesus said that a man took a seed, a tiny speck, it's like you could hardly see it, and he put it in the garden, and it grew up, and it became a large tree that the birds of the sky lodged in its branches. Great moves of God always look small, unremarkable, foolish even. And the good news is that God's power is glorified in weak people like us. When I was living in Amsterdam, one day I was looking out our apartment, and there was a riot going on in the street. People were digging up bricks and they're throwing them at each other. You could hear glasses breaking, and one gang was chasing another gang down the alley, and then the other gang would pick up bricks and chase the other gang down the alley. And I'm watching this out my window. All of a sudden, one policeman came, and he came driving into the parking lot. He jumped out of the police car, and he started running into the gangs, about 100 people armed with just a rubber stick. And when he did this, it was amazing what happened. People threw their bricks, threw their bottles down, and together they ran down the alley with a policeman chasing after them. And I thought, this is crazy. But you see, the policeman believed in whom he represented. For that moment, he believed that the authority that he had as the police was so strong that he alone could run into a riot full of people with bricks and bottles, armed only with a rubber stick. It's time. It's time for us all over the world to believe in whom we represent. Because if God is for us, who can be against us? He who is in us is greater than he was in the world. And now is the time for us to have radical faith. At our center in Germany, we have a big sign on the wall. And it says, God rewards those who seek him with a desperate heart. It's based on Hebrews 11:6, where it says, without faith, it's impossible to please God, for you must believe that God exists and that he rewards those who seek him with an earnest heart. God is always moved with desperate prayers. Always, always, always. And now more than ever, now is the time for all of us who follow Jesus to say enough is enough. It's time that we say we are not going to accept the status quo anymore. Jesus says to you, in this world, you will have trouble, but be courageous. I have overcome the world. I was on tour with my band, No Longer Music, in Turkey, and I went to Ephesus. And I went to the ancient ruins of Ephesus, and I wanted to read about Paul, the Apostle Paul in the Bible, what it was like when he was in Ephesus. And so I read that God did great miracles through Paul, that people would take parts of his clothes. They would take parts of his clothes and they would cut it off, and they would go and they would touch people who were sick and they'd be healed. And I'm reading this in the ruins of Ephesus, and I felt like God spoke to me and said, David, Paul wasn't some guy floating in the air. He wasn't some supernatural being. He was somebody just like you. I want to do things like this in your life. If you will seek me desperately, if you will follow me 100%. You see, we are in the beginnings of a new move. And every revolution that has begun on the streets. And a Jesus movement is already beginning. I'm here to tell you, from Moscow to Sao Paulo, from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Beirut to Houston, from Delhi to Seoul, from Hong Kong to Cape Town, and everywhere in between, a wave is coming and nothing is going to stop it. Nothing is going to stop it. Jesus takes away our guilt and shame, our sorrows and fears, and he fills us with joy and courage. And then he gives us a mission to complete while we are still on this planet. The purpose of your life is not pleasure and pointless consumption, not to be constantly searching for security and comfort. The world wants to turn us into zombies, void of all human feelings and passions. But when I receive God's calling, when I hear God's voice, I become ignited with life and purpose. And it's not a wide road. It's a narrow road, costly, but it's the best. Take a look at this map. This is us. This is the location of all of our countries, all of us who have participated just during this first weekend. Look at that. I mean, it's crazy to think that all of us have been brought together from all over the world for just this first weekend. All movements of God always start with a few. All movements of God always start with a few. Just like us. Sparks in a dry field, parched and lifeless. Embers of light, so fragile, they could go out at any moment. But when God breathes on us, these embers turn into a raging fire that nothing will put out. And I'm here to tell you right now, God is breathing on us. God is breathing on us. Do you feel his breath? He calls us. He calls us to go to a global youth culture, crying out for hope, looking for answers. God is saying to all of us scattered around the world, he's saying to us, stand up. Receive your calling. Say yes to Jesus. Say, here am I. Send me. And so I want everyone now to turn on your video. Okay, everyone turn on your video. And just kind of scroll and take a look at each other. So if everyone who can, if you could turn on your video so we can see you. If everyone could turn on your video and just scroll on and see everyone there. And I'd like us together around the world to raise our hands. Together. Raise our hands before God. Together. And say, Jesus, here we are. Your children, scattered all over the world. And we raise our hands together. And we say, Jesus, don't call someone else. Call us. We are weak, but you are strong. And you have always used weak people like us to change the world. And so we are ready. Take this spark that's in us, blow on it with your Holy Spirit, and let it be a blaze that consumes our lives, and let us be a light to this world that needs to know the truth. In Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you. Guys, God's moving. Make sure you're connecting. Make sure you take steps. God is moving, and it's so exciting to be part of this. Remember, we're going to be back next weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday again. We're going to be talking about justice. We're going to talk about sexuality, and then we're going to talk about how do we apply this with real people. So don't miss it. Share it with others. We love you all. Have a great week. Talk to you soon.
Okay, I don't know, but I've been told when the Saints come marching in, we roll so deep that they can't believe we sold out seats in them CDs. Please don't sleep on the beat. Beat up these, still don't get it, what you keep up, please. We ain't no heroes for sale. If you bought one, better keep your receipts. Okay, I get it. I know what they thinking. We some kumbaya singing, corny Christians. Keep your distance. Buy a ticket to a concert, pay a visit. Think it's odd. We them Blues Brothers, 116 on a mission from God. I don't think they get it. I really think what they gotta do is see it to believe it. I wasn't planning on leaving them. Give me the microphone with no gimmicks. I really live it. So then they come in, don't get know but I don't get them. And if you ever wanna get it, we'll tell them to come and get it. I want them to, I got it, and tell them we really with them. They're thinking that I'm tripping because I'm living for more than just rapping. What is what happens when the Saints go marching in? Go marching in. When the Saints go marching in. Go marching in. When the Saints go marching in. Saints go marching in. Saints go marching in. Saints go marching in. Marching, my homies, they be marching. Take to the second letter. Oh no, pretty go-go. Them boys sold out, no promo. Said they give it 2 years, it'll go cold. But they words got 8 like Ocho. I'ma give it 300. In the street, why they wanna see us go on? But we in it, we live it, we get it. Our dog gon' do what they want on. We fragrant, the aroma is that our God say. Every to the rock and I'm faithful to take these words Beyonce. You know, to feel like we famous, but the world don't know what our name is. But heaven knows us, baby. But let's book a life, it's that A-list, so I bow. I'm so rich and I ain't talking about cheddar, but I bet cold Christ go and talk to the teller. Cause the checks that I get, I be cashing forever. Bad for the same time, get the thing go. They be lacking to pay that. Niggas straight man, we ain't lacking the thing back with the fake pay, but the